Welcome to the Painting of the Week podcast, where we look at some of the most significant paintings throughout history. Introducing your hosts, Phil Grabsky and Laura Bentham.
Welcome to this week's Painting of the Week, and we've got a treat today. I'm at the National Gallery, not with Laura today. I'm here with Martin Bailey, who is author and has a weekly blog about Van Gogh in the art newspaper. For those of you who don't read the art newspaper, you should. He's also a curator and author of many books, including a recent book, which is Studio of Provence, Studio of the South, Van Gogh in Provence, I beg your pardon. And we're standing in front of one of the 61 artworks that form part of a really spectacular show at the National Gallery, their first show on Van Gogh. The show is entitled Van Gogh, Poets and Lovers, and we're here filming it. This particular painting is called Starry, Night over the Rhone, and it is from September 1888. The other thing to say is it is our poster image, so for those of you who've seen our poster in cinemas around the country, you'll have spotted it, and it also, I've just seen the image they've chosen for the catalogue. Right. I also should say, before we start, that many of you no doubt have heard of Starry Night. This is not the one which is in New York. This is an earlier version, and we'll talk about it, but this one I know was painted en plein air, so out in the open, and I believe the other one was actually painted in his studio, so there are differences. Martin, so could you tell me a little bit about this painting? What do we know about Van Gogh at the time that he paints this?
Well, Van Gogh had arrived in Arles, and in September he just moved into the Yellow House, and that was in a square and a garden which he really enjoyed. And the painting was done on the side of the Rhone. It was probably 3 or 4 minutes walk from his house, so he knew the area very well, and he decided to paint it at night. He'd probably walked along here many times. So it's a nighttime scene, but he's added a lot of imagination to the picture. It's not a sort of topographically accurate landscape or riverscape.
Now, there's many things we can talk about the painting, but if we just start with the lights, it is noteworthy that there are these night lights. So these are presumably gas, and relatively recent installation, I'd have thought, certainly in Paris. It's really from the mid-19th century that you're getting gas lighting at night. So this gives him great liberty to paint the effects of light along with the stars, wouldn't you say?
Yes, he's interested here in the effects of artificial light added to the natural light of the stars in the sky. And yes, gas lighting had been installed relatively recently. In fact, it was just being installed in the Yellow House. So for the first time, Van Gogh was able to work inside in the evenings. Now, one of the noticeable things that we see standing in front of the painting is the reflections of the gas light in the Rhone. And they're vastly exaggerated. The lights are actually some distance away. The back of the composition is about 1 kilometre away where the bridge is, but the lights are really shining through. And in reality, with a fast-moving river, you'd hardly see reflections like this. So it's Van Gogh's imaginative interpretation. And in a sense, the stars in the sky are reflected, if you like, in a sense, in the artificial light which we see in the River Rhone.
So we should imagine him standing by the side of the river with a fairly big easel. This is a big canvas. I wouldn't like to estimate, but I mean it's certainly more than 1 metre across metre and a half maybe. This is quite a sizable... I mean, how long would you imagine he would be outside, and how finished do you think the painting would be before he would take it back to the studio? Bearing in mind he's he's painting at night.
Yes, it's very difficult to paint at night. There's a sort of story that goes the rounds that he had a hat on and was wearing candles around the hat.
Now, famous Goya painting.
Exactly, a Goya is supposed to have done that. Now, I don't think that's true. It would be a very dangerous way of painting at night, and in fact, the candles would fall off, the wax would drip all over the place, and it wouldn't actually help you. I think he did a quick composition outside and then finished it in his studio the following morning. I think that would be the only practical way to work. And you can imagine it was quite a busy area. If you were painting outside, there would be people coming past, commenting all the time, and you'd prefer to really get down to it in the privacy of your own studio.
So there's an experimentation. He's exploring the nature of light and reflected light. But what do you think is the narrative of the painting? What is he trying to... Because there's so many levels to a Van Gogh painting. Beyond that immediate visceral pleasure of seeing the blue and the yellow and the... What do you think he's trying to say?
Well, I don't think there's any one easy answer that one can give. And as you say, the various narratives or various aspects to the picture. I mean, at the very bottom, there's a couple arm-in-arm lovers. The gentleman wears a straw hat, a bit like the one that Vincent tended to wear. Now, I think those figures were not actually standing there when he painted it, but he added them in the studio. And that's to add a little bit of human life and the idea that lovers would go strolling along the river on a nice evening. It's partly a view of Arles because you see the whole panorama of the town set above in the middle of the composition that goes right the way across. You see the towers of the churches and then the bridge which goes to the other side of the Rhone. You see the water here. And originally the composition was slightly different because if we look closely at this lower left corner, you can see some brushwork which has been painted over. And that's because he originally had more land at that corner of the composition and he's turned it into water. And I suppose to allow more room for the reflections of the lights. And then we come up to the stars at the top. They're obviously much brighter than stars would be in reality. And he's exaggerated the constellation with the plough in a rather sort of artificial way, but he's saying that is the plough, that's the constellation. And it's unusual to do a painting at night. I mean, other painters did it, but it is slightly unusual. And I guess above all, he was playing with the idea of light, natural and artificial.
I suppose it is possible. I mean, is it possible that the gas lighting could have come right round behind him?
It would have done, but it wouldn't. In reality, it would have been nothing like as bright as in the painting, and it wouldn't have actually allowed you very much scope for looking at your looking at the easel and what you had on there and the different colour paints. It really would have been quite a challenge to have painted outside, and I think he would have basically just got the outline of the composition done outside and then finished it in his studio.
Just a tangential question, but we know about his, well, I was going to say poverty, but I mean he's near poverty at times, and he's reliant on his brother to sending him paints. Oil paints are never cheap. This maybe sounds a slightly silly question, but there's an awful lot of paint here. Is this an expensive painting? I mean, is he investing a lot of money in this, or do we know that Theo was actually sending him easily enough paints? And there's an awful lot of blue being used. I mean, he's getting through a few tubes here, isn't he?
Yes, there is a lot of paint. And nowadays, of course, it's actually worth an awful lot of money, but it wasn't in his day because he couldn't sell it. He liked the idea of using thick paint, or impasto as it's technically called, and he sent his brother Theo very large orders for paint, and he kept ordering more and more paint. He wasn't really worried about the cost, he just wanted his brother to send it. His brother actually supported him financially, and we think of Van Gogh living on the poverty line, and he rather gives that impression in many of his letters, but actually he was relatively well off because of this allowance. But the fact is, he was very bad at organising his funding, and as soon as he got money, he spent it.
He does come from a relatively, how would you describe it? Not middle class exactly, but I mean, you know, he's got, was it 3 sisters? Obviously a brother, 2 brothers, 6 children, and then you've got the father who is the priest. So it's quite a, could you say, comfortable background? Certainly very literate. They're reading a lot of books.
I would say yes, middle class. I mean, his father earned a relatively small salary, but was given free accommodation as a pastor. And they were middle class in the sense that they attached a great importance to education and particularly to reading and being literate. So yes, he came from a very middle class background. Then his life, of course, had ups and downs, and he was undecided what to do. Eventually, he decided to become an artist. Yeah,
for the last 10 years of his life. Now, this exhibition is subtitled Poets and Lovers. In this particular painting, I have read how, or somebody put forward the suggestion that is Van Gogh himself, and he's projecting himself into the painting, arm in arm with a nice young lady. I don't know how anyone could know that, but do you buy into those kind of theories, or do you just think he's just putting a couple in there for a bit of narrative, a bit of to give some context to the space? He often put couples into his paintings that don't have to be him.
Yes, I think he's put the couple in ready to bring the picture alive, to bring a sense of scale to the painting. And it's quite interesting if you look at it, the couple are almost literally standing on what is now the frame of the painting. The positioning is such. It's tempting to see Van Gogh in the male character, and particularly because of the straw hat. I think artists often sort of half portray themselves when they're painting anonymous figures in landscapes or pictures. I don't think he was consciously thinking of himself as either having a lover or wanting a lover. I think he just thought that two people who were engaged in something and strolling along would add interest to the composition. And as I've suggested, I think he probably added them a day or two later after doing the composition outside. But it is nice to sort of think about these characters and who they represent, and the exhibition obviously provides a wonderful opportunity and context to do that.
I guess what is plausibly relevant is that for him it's perfectly natural that you have a couple. So rather than having individuals, he has chosen to have a couple walking in the evening, and that to him is a natural event. The other thing which is interesting is that the man, whose face is not defined at all, but he is wearing the blue overalls which were then and continue to be in France the sign of a worker, if you like. If you go to any garage, so many different locations, the French male workers are wearing blue overalls, maybe females too. So he's also representing somebody from the working class, I would suggest there. I guess the straw hat also might suggest that.
Yes, of course, he also wore those sort of clothing for his work. You've got paint all over yourself, turpentine, so you had to wear these sort of clothes. So I think those are sort of clothes that he wore. It's interesting to look at the figure of the woman who's got her arm in his arm, and she's wearing a shawl, the type of shawl that were worn by the women of Arles, the Arlesian, and as part of their traditional costume. So she's obviously a local woman, very much from the town of Arles, where Van Gogh is painting.
I like the fact she's almost got a little smile on her face. Now, we're only 14 years from Impression Sunrise, the first, what's now called Impressionist exhibition in Paris. Would Van Gogh consider himself to have been an Impressionist? Would he have considered himself to have moved on from Impressionism? Well, I did recently talk to one of the curators here, Chris Riopel, who said something quite interesting, which was that all modern artists at this time would have considered themselves Impressionists. It was a kind of an alternative term or the term for a modern artist. But I don't recall having read Vincent van Gogh referring to himself as an Impressionist. So what would you say has been the journey from 1874 to 1888 in terms of Impressionism and where Van Gogh may or may not be on that line?
Yes, modern art was developing extremely quickly at that time. Now, Van Gogh arrived in Paris from Antwerp in the Netherlands in 1886. And until then, he had probably not seen any Impressionist pictures. So his 2 years in Paris opened his eyes at this new art. And the thing that struck him, or struck home, if you like, was the way in which the Impressionists used colour. And that was the big thing that he took away with him when he left. And the astonishing thing about Van Gogh's artistic journey is quite how quick it was. He was there in Paris for 2 years. Then he came to Arles, and he was isolated from the rest of the art world. Paris was the international centre of the art world, and Arles was a backwater. So he then sort of developed himself. He wasn't influenced by what other people did. And he took colour and he really ran with it, if you like. And he loved complementary colours. And in this painting that we're in front of now, he loved the idea of essentially the yellows and the blues, and that's what dominate the picture. He really used the term Impressionism, which he didn't use very often, to mean cutting-edge art. He didn't use the word to describe himself. He didn't think the word was particularly important. He was never to know that in his way after he died, that the expression post-impressionism would be invented, and that he would, along with Gauguin, would be seen as the leaders. So the bottom line is, he wasn't particularly interested in terminology. He was interested in art.
Now, I think it's important with Van Gogh not to have his artwork completely dominated by issues of mental health. But is it relevant that Paris was maybe, whilst being eye-opening to him and must have been very exciting, and he's like a sponge for all these other artists, but also maybe a bit too frenetic, and part of the motivation for leaving was that it was almost too much for him. He wanted to go south. There was other reasons, we've talked about it in our film Van Gogh in Japan, that he was in search of his Japan and the light was different, so on and so forth. But when he gets to Arles, which it's not an artistic centre, he is, as you've just said, kind of almost operating on his own. So on the one hand, he's keen to create a community, he's really keen to know what other artists are doing, but he's also chosen a location where he can develop almost singly. Is that fair to say?
Yes, I'm not sure that was a sort of conscious decision that he wanted to do, but there was a huge contrast in his life in Paris and then moving to Arles. And in a sense, he took the best of Paris. He discovered the Impressionists, and then he took advantage of being by himself in Arles to develop art in the way that he wanted to do, and it was his own personal perception. And I think if he'd been surrounded by lots of other artists, or he'd been to see lots of exhibitions, he probably wouldn't have developed as quickly. So it's an astonishing development when he goes to Arles. The light is stronger, he feels invigorated, And it's amazing to think that the Dutch pictures were only 3 years earlier. These were dark pictures in grey tones, and this is a completely different art. And this is, of course, the Van Gogh that we all love.
A couple more questions. Is it unusual in art history and at this time to do a night painting?
Yes, it is unusual. It's obviously more challenging for the artist. And I suppose in general, people would prefer to have a nice sunny landscape hanging above their sofa rather than a night scene. And Van Gogh didn't do many night scenes, but I think he saw them as a challenge and an opportunity and a way of seeing a landscape in a different way.
And who do you think, there's always the third party. You've got the canvas, you've got the artist, but who do you think he was thinking of as the potential audience? The potential audience.
Yeah, I think by this time Van Gogh was getting pessimistic that his work would sell. He always hoped it would, but so far it had failed. And I don't think he had a potential audience in mind. He wanted to do it. He wanted to create it. He knew his brother would receive it and enjoy it, along with hundreds of other canvases. But it wasn't done with a wider audience in mind. It wasn't done to sell. It's not the most sellable subject. He did it because he wanted to.
Final question then. There is another Starry Night in at MoMA, isn't it, in New York?
Yep.
Why did he do it again? What's different about that painting?
Well, they're actually quite different paintings. They've got the same title, which leads to the confusion. And they both show a starry sky. But they are quite different pictures. The Starry Night that he did from the asylum is the landscape, although it shares some similarities with the landscape around the asylum, is much more from his imagination. The stars are rolling across the sky in the asylum picture. Here they're stationary. And we don't have the artificial lights reflected as a contrast to the natural stars that you find in the asylum painting.
Martin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Painting of the Week podcast. For more information, please visit our website at seventh-art.com or contact us by emailing info@seventh-art.com. See you next time.